I'm Matthew. Welcome again to another episode of Matthew's Hot Kitchen, where you never know what we're cooking up. Anyway, this time on Matthew's Hot Kitchen, I've been asked to show how I make my sourdough bread. So anyway, we will do that. Sourdough bread, you have to think at least a day in advance when you're going to make it, because you have to do some process steps like refrigerate the dough overnight, and it also takes quite a few hours to fold and develop the bread. So you don't want to start this, you have to count about 24 hours in advance. So right now it's about 6 o'clock in the evening, so that means this bread's going to be ready about 6 o'clock tomorrow evening. There's a 4-hour rest, and then a 12-hour rest in the refrigerator, so 16 hours of just sitting around. So usually like to have that happen in the evening to start, and then when you go to bed, put it in the refrigerator. So you have to think a little bit of ahead of time. Incidentally, the recipe I base my sourdough on comes from the King Arthur Flour webpage. I can show it here for you. It's called Extra Tangy Sourdough Bread, and it has all the ingredients in there and the process. But I'm going to deviate a little bit from it, but not in a big way. And the other thing about sourdough bread is that it's a surprise every time. No recipe can anticipate the temperature of your kitchen, the humidity of your kitchen, the strength of your starter. So as a result, all these times are just suggestions, guidelines, and you really need to vary it based on experience. So the best way to get experience is just to do it, and don't be afraid to mess up. Most of the failures I've had didn't rise very well, but they still tasted very good. So you can't be afraid to experiment with sourdough. That's probably the most important piece of advice. The other thing is it's amazingly simple. You just use flour and water. That's how you make it, and a little bit of salt. Usually most breads use yeast, but in sourdough we use this bacteria that is the starter. How did I get the starter? I went out to a grape vineyard, and the little yeast that grows on the grapes. It's a little powdery white yeast. You pull some grapes off, maybe a handful, and put them in some water and flour, and it starts to ferment. It starts to activate after a few days, and then you build the starter up. You strengthen it by adding more bread flour, or any flour, and water at 1-to-1 ratios, and you add it every day, maybe twice a day, for about a week, maybe 2 weeks, and it starts to strengthen and get stronger. So anyway, so that's probably one of the two most important key parts of sourdough is number one, the starter. Here, I'll explain the other one later. But a good starter will be bubbly. I don't know if you can see that. Bubbles in there. And also, it should smell very nice. Come on with my assistant, Kamiko, assistant and wife. It should smell clean and sour, but not in a rotten way.
No, it's not even sour. It's like it smells like a real nice aromatic bread. So this is just your hand-grown grapes and water and flour. Yeah. That's it.
So this has been going for about 2 years, the starter.
Very nice.
And it's easy to maintain. You, when you're done with it, you take a sample out of it to make your bread. You put the rest, and you put it in the back, somewhere in the back of your refrigerator maybe, and it kind of goes to sleep. And you have to feed it maybe once a week, maybe once every 2 weeks if you forget. But it's actually pretty durable. But when you do pull it out of the refrigerator, you have to, I like to pull it out a day or two in advance of bread making, let it come to room temperature, and then feed it a few more times, get it activated again. So I've done that in advance here. So this is fed, starter, and it's ready to go. So we're going to do the first few steps here before we put it in the refrigerator or let it rest and then put it in the refrigerator. We're going to start our sourdough odyssey here. We're going to try to make a loaf of olive bread. And it's basically sourdough with olives and a few other ingredients thrown in. So to start doing this, I get this bowl, and we'll measure out a quarter cup, or is it a half cup? I got the half cup of starter to get started. This little quarter cup.
Do you need to shake it?
No, I shook it up earlier. Okay. So that is the starter. By the way, most good bakers really benefit from a gram scale. So I'm going to start using the scale here to do measurements. The weights are much more accurate. So the starter comes to about 115 grams. Again, you can find this on King Arthur. The next ingredient is flour. I use bread flour, but you can use all-purpose flour. Bread flour, you might have to add a little bit more water. Anyway, so 181 grams of bread flour we're going to need. You don't have to be exact, by the way. Again, sourdough bread making is, you don't have to be exact about many things. All right? And then water. Water, you need to make sure you use non-chlorinated water. A lot of our tap waters have chlorine in them, and that's not very good for yeast or sourdough bacteria. So I get mine from reverse osmosis. I have a filter also, but you can also get it from spring water, bottled water, be good. So we need to add 3/4 cup or about 170 grams of non-chlorinated water, lukewarm. Again, doesn't have to be exact. We'll be making adjustments. Oh, my favorite spatula. Okay, so we need to stir this, and we need to stir it just so basically it wets everything down nicely. You don't have to go crazy mixing it, but really it's to moisten everything up. And also, yeah, I think the starter needs to be mixed in pretty well. But the quality of the bread is really not determined yet at this stage. We're just really just blending and wetting the dough and getting it ready to sit for 4 hours. So,
I see.
Okay. It'll have a very loose consistency like this. And by the way, sourdough bread making, you may be dealing with dough wetnesses that are very high as a percentage, maybe 60, maybe 70, 75%, and are very sticky and very difficult to handle. But once you get used to that, you can make really good bread. Anyway, so that's about it.
You don't even like a kneading? And...
No kneading.
Wow, it's already quite it's had a nice viscosity already.
Yeah, so it's kind of like oatmeal or pudding, so to speak. But so that's the first stage here, and we will cover it with wrap, and we're going to let it sit for 4 hours at room temperature, and it's going to start a fermentation process. It'll maybe start to bubble a little bit, and then after that, we're going to put it in the refrigerator for overnight. So I don't know if I'll try and show it in an intermediate video before we put it in the refrigerator, but it's going to look a lot like this, maybe a few bubbles in it. And then we'll take it out in the morning, and you'll see some fermentation going on in it. And then in the morning, that's when the quality of the bread, a lot of things become a little bit more critical as far as what you do and when you do it. And also when we mix the ingredients in tomorrow, our mixing has to be a lot more rigorous than what we just did now. So anyway, so this is the easy part. You can do this the evening before. It's pretty easy to throw this together and just let it sit out. And after dinner, I just put it in the refrigerator overnight. Anyway, so that's the first stage of Mathew's Sourdough Kitchen. So again, welcome to Mathew's Hot Kitchen, where you never know what we're cooking up.